As people are joining, we'll just take a quick minute or two, seeing some familiar faces joining. Welcome all. Some great material to get through today. I think what I'll do is go ahead and kick off and get us started. So once again, a warm welcome to everyone joining us today for Evangelical Christian approaches to faith consistent investing. This is our final forum for the year. We do four of these on the quarter every year, and I had a chance to look back at some of the topics that we've covered over the time that I've been with Faith Invest, the last 4 years, and it's really been quite a diverse range of different faith practices, bringing the ways that they implement their values into portfolios, Catholic social teaching, Islamic investing, Jewish investing, and we've also focused on the ways that groups can bring their values into portfolios, whether that's through blended finance structures or how they can be active in promoting their values through shareholder engagement with the ICCR. We had that forum earlier this year. So we hope that those of you who've been coming to the quarterly forums have enjoyed them and gotten a lot out of them. And we're very delighted to see new folks who've come to their first forum today. So I'm going to just roll through a quick update on our research before turning it over to our guests today as we talk about evangelical Christian approaches to FCI. A couple of quick updates here. As you know, a big part of our focus is on research and education at Faith Invest, and we have a foundational document from Faith Values to Investment, which talks about how faith groups can develop an investment policy that really expresses their faith values and then put that into practice, and how folks need to think about the various steps and obstacles that might be encountered along the way. It's meant to be a very practical guide, and we've just expanded it greatly. So we do hope that if you haven't had a chance to see it yet, just jump onto our website. It's right there under the resources tab. And then also, I must mention, we're very excited about an update to our Good Intentions research report. First came out in 21. We had an update in 23, and now the 2026 update on the actual range of faith expressions within portfolios as analyzed within investment policies. Okay, that was a little bit of a mouthful, but what we're doing is analytical work that looks at investment policies. We're greatly expanding the set of policies that we look at to determine how well faith groups are actually talking about how their faith is expressed in their portfolios and how they're following through on that. We do have an opportunity for sponsorship on the next update in 2026. I know that we often have a number of folks from various investment providers on these calls, on these forums. So if you're interested in this, it's a great opportunity to get involved and partner with us on the development of this new and expanded update to our Good Intentions report. And one of the things I'll say about it is it was eye-opening to me the first time I saw the results, which spoke to the fact that of all the faith-based organizations that we looked at, in their investment policies, only slightly more than half of them even talk about their faith values in those policies. So we think that there are a lot of good intentions out there and a lot of good work that can yet be done. And we think that these two foundational reports are intended to help that process, that faith consistent investing journey of faith-based asset owners. So that's just quick on that. Let's turn to our topic today on Evangelical Christianity, as I mentioned earlier, we've done a number of faith-specific looks at values in portfolios and investment practices. We have a wonderful combination of that today with our friends from Sovereigns. But just to set the stage, evangelicals worldwide, and I was not aware of this before hearing a World Evangelical Alliance session just back in September, where we heard from a wonderful researcher, Gina Zerlo, who's from the Harvard Divinity School, who does work on demographics. And here she has her data showing us that breaking down the numbers of evangelicals worldwide, it's a bigger number than I thought it was going to be. I'd always thought it was somewhere. I knew it was a big number, but it speaks to the different ways that researchers can categorize different faith groups. And here we have those with denominational affiliations, the geographic locations, trying to get past what's in a name to what is actually being practiced and what the beliefs are that inform those practices. And that's really the most important thing from our point of view at Faith Invest is those beliefs and how they get expressed. So to that, let's move right into our two speakers today, and we can get a great look at evangelical Christian approaches as they are actually being expressed in investments with two speakers from Sovereigns Capital. Sovereigns Capital is a firm that we'll be hearing about from Jake and Matt today. They do great work. They have a number of different kinds of units and practices that we'll hear a little bit about, two of them today. So let me start off by introducing Jake Thomsen. He's a managing partner and heads up the group of venture capital within Sovereigns. And so this is where it all begins for some companies, and as they get started, as they form, and as they express their beliefs in their business operations. So Jake, as you can see, has had a great deal of experience, and will have some great things to share with us. So Jake, let me leave it there and turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Steve and Pippa and Susie. And thank you to all of you for making time to join us this morning and this afternoon. We at Sovereigns are such big fans of the work that Faith Invest is doing to expand the surface area to have these kinds of conversations. So truly an honor to be here with you all for the quarterly spotlight. So thank you all. At Sovereigns Capital, our mission is we exist to love God and love our neighbor through investing. So as context of the overall firm, we've been around for about 14 years. We are a registered investment advisor with about 1.1. We can actually stay on that first slide there with the quote. Thank you. Got about $1.1 billion in assets under management, and that really spans across venture capital, private equity, fund of funds, public equities. And our unique approach is that we invest in faith-driven, Christ-following leaders, men and women building for above-market returns, but shaping their products, their services, their internal cultures to contribute to human flourishing. So we support them like any other firm in helping them to build the companies and the funds that they're leading, but also by encouraging them in their faith. And that's really how we live out our mission. And today we'll share about our work, really just one approach in this space, one example of investing from a Christian perspective. And I'll start the conversation discussing, as Steve mentioned, companies at the beginning of their journey, those that are taking venture capital. And I'll share about the kinds of faith-driven founders that are out there and what they're motivated by, and how we uniquely support them as faith-driven investors. And then on the other side of the spectrum, after that, Matt will discuss how these companies and others like them can impact at scale after they go public and touch a growing number of stakeholders. And in both of our reflections, we really hope that the goal for us is to get your wheels turning. We've learned so much from many of the organizations on this call this morning, and hopefully we can offer just some grist for the mill, so to speak, so that you can be spurred on toward the good works to which you're called in the conversation. So to start with venture capital, just as a quick intro, then we'll move on to the next slide. When I say venture, I don't mean capital for just any early stage company. I really mean that kind of investing into highly scalable tech companies, which tends to be very high risk, high reward, right? We invest in 10 companies on the venture side. We expect 5 or 6 of them to go to zero, and really 1 or 2 of them to do so well that they drive the returns to hit our target returns of top quartile for our funds. So bottom line, when these companies succeed, they can succeed really big. And we get excited about this asset class because these tech companies at scale tend to be some of the most culture shaping companies of our day. And turns out that fewer than 1% of new companies each year are backed by venture capital. And yet these companies tend to grow to almost 80% of public market cap, right? That is a huge part of the market. That's a lot of market cap, which is a function of a lot of revenue. And that revenue really represents a lot of customers that they're touching. They touch billions of customers every single year. And when they do, they become ambassadors of the values that are inherent in the DNA of these companies. And they change our lives in the process. And we all feel this, right? If we take stock of the companies that shape the art of the possible in our own lives, how we work, live, communicate, even think, chances are they're tech companies. And the influence they have can be for better or for worse, right? To take Netflix, a company, an incredible company in so many ways, a company that I love and use, and it provides exponentially more content. And yet at the edge, is it can be consumption as easy escapism, really taking this idea of leisure, which traditionally has been a very community driven endeavor, and made it very individualized, right? And we've got to grapple with that unintended consequence. Or Facebook, again, incredibly redemptive outcomes in terms of reuniting old friends. But on the flip side, right, in their mantra to move fast and break things, it seems as time goes on, we're learning more and more how one of the things that has been partly broken is the mental health of an entire generation of young women in particular. Right, or Uber, better transportation. I use it again almost every week. It's incredibly convenient, but especially in the early days, right? There was a culture where there was sexual discrimination across the ranks, people literally committing suicide because of the culture of the organization, and very well documented exploitation of drivers. A lot of that has been changed, but really the flip side of that influence they can have at scale. So these companies do have influence, and even when the challenges aren't intentional, these types of companies would look very different when human flourishing is the core goal. And that's really why we got into our work at Sovereigns Capital 14 years ago when we started in venture capital in this very asset class. We believe that transformation happens in and through the marketplace. And we get really excited about faith-driven founders with the ambitions to build companies like these at scale, but who recognize that their businesses can set culture as they reach it and love their neighbor with tech solutions at any scale along the way. So there are faith-driven founders out there, and let's move to the next slide, because there are a lot of them, actually. We run across about 500 every single year that are just getting started in these technology companies, and we invest at some of the earliest stages. Here are 3 examples that I'll hit as some counterexamples. These are from our portfolio over the years. The first one there is Grab on the right. Grab is essentially the Uber of Southeast Asia. By God's grace, they're one of the largest tech companies in Southeast Asia today. It's about a $21 billion company. And the CEO, Anthony, he started the company to address assault against women in the taxi cab system in the early days. A big problem in the region. He said, this is the way we can do that. He had core values that reflected his faith, like to outserve the competition, not just crush the competition, but outserve them, right? Really about servant leadership. And deeply took care of his drivers. Today, they've got about 5 million drivers, 40% of whom did not have jobs before Grab. So they're creating employment and serving very well. This is a small excerpt from their latest ESG report from 2024. And you can see the kinds of things that they're doing, right? Creating jobs, doing that with a lens through equal opportunity, really caring about environmental and creation care. Just a lot of impact that they're having. And this impact is so far reaching because of the excellence with which Anthony Tan has built the company, which itself is a reflection of his faith. Another example, really on the opposite side of that journey, Passage Health is Series A, which is early. Right, we invested at their seed, which is even earlier and riskier, but they progressed quite well. And the CEO, part of his story was growing up in a family that was touched by autism, and he saw a lot of brokenness in the space. Where on the one hand you have a growing population of autism, 1 in 36 kids are diagnosed, compared to 1 out of 150 20 years ago. And yet with that flood, there's such a long wait list. It can be up to 12 months that a kid is waiting to be seen by a provider. And a big part of this is just the lack of efficiencies in the operations of these ABA autism clinics. And so Bill has created a technology platform that is patient management. You can log case notes. Everything about the operations of these practices is made more efficient with his solution. And in doing so, he gives back about 20 hours of time monthly to every single provider. So think about half a week, once a month, just the amount of primarily kids that are seen by these providers is just growing over time because of this faith-driven founder that is seeking to solve this problem and seeking a return at the same time. And third example, very different, Valor Atomics. So this is a company that is in the nuclear space creating small modular reactors. Isaiah's grandfather was on the Manhattan Project, so he really grew up in this space. And he has a deep conviction that energy that is affordable and safe and abundant is one of the major inputs to human flourishing in international development, just in our daily lives. And he has a unique approach to nuclear. So we think about it a lot with electricity, which will be part of the mix. But he's convicted that when you have these what he's calling gigasites, and you have a lot of these small modular reactors in one site, you can create a lot of heat. When you do, there are some proven processes that haven't quite been put together quite like this. But in doing so, you can pull carbon out of the air, hydrogen out of water, and combine them for hydrocarbons, essentially limitless oil and gas from water and from carbon. And because you're pulling carbon out of the air, it can be done in net neutral ways in terms of carbon emissions. And in his view of the world, if you have these in a bunch of developing countries, well, you can have limitless energy for development and for human flourishing. And while it sounds almost like science fiction, it's becoming very tangible. 2 weeks ago, they announced they're the first startup ever to split the atom, only the 10th private company in the history of the world to do so. And so once again, a founder that is motivated by his personal faith to have impact on the world, and he sees technology companies as a way to do that. And all these leaders, I mean, it's worth noting that they're leaders for whom Christianity isn't just a philosophy or a checkbox of rules or activities, right? They believe they're part of a grand story of history. It's a story where there's a creator God that made a good world, but that world fell into disrepair through sin and human brokenness. And ever since then, God has been on a rescue mission. And for Christians, of course, the climax of that story is the coming of Jesus, who they believe made a way for us to be made right with God and therefore be drawn in to be used as his hands and his feet in that rescue mission. So these founders, that all creates a deep sense of accountability tied to their core identity and mission in life, that when they love God and love their neighbor through their companies, they're really living into his will for them and to the world more broadly. And they see their work as worship. And that's important because it's such a unique, anchored motivation and also a powerful one. And worth noting, everybody asks about AI these days, and maybe an encouragement that we're seeing with faith-driven founders. There's an accountability in this phase or in this season to really lean into AI, right? There are so many potentially thorny issues with AI. What does it mean to be human in this new era? What does it look like to have job disruption? How do you allow the right amount of that in ways with dignity, right? A lot of nuances in this space. And there's an entire generation of faith-driven founders that look back at social media and say, man, we weren't there. And look what happened when people who didn't care as much about human flourishing were the leaders in that space. And so there are a lot of folks that are at the top ranks of Google and the big tech companies, but also starting new startups that are leaning into this space with a similar view of saying, well, if we believe God's making all things new, how do we lean into that mission together? So for what it's worth, hopefully an encouragement. We'll go to the next slide here. So these are the kinds of companies that faith-driven founders are launching and some of their motivations. And all of this creates an opportunity for investors like us, for investors like many of you in your respective callings, to serve and encourage them in unique ways. Here on this slide, these are some faith-driven programs and approaches that we use to serve beyond supporting the core business. I'll hit on a few of these to start with that number 2 there, the spiritual integration plan. So every time we invest in a company, we ask them to fill out this SI plan to ask 4 simple questions. The first one is, how do you understand your business leadership in light of your faith? Giving them an opportunity to unpack their sense of calling, this idea that they're stewards of the company, not just owners, right? The theology of what they're doing. Number 2 is asking them, how do they seek to pursue ministry in deed and ministry in word? Ministry in deed really being the human flourishing elements of what their companies can do. Ministry in word is being ready to share their personal why as a way to kind of represent for themselves, but also give others the encouragement to consider their own personal why and how that impacts their work. Number 3 is, when appropriate, how do you think about measuring these things? And number 4, who holds you accountable? And together, this gives a very simple plan that we can return to a couple times a year and just check in. How's it going? How do you feel like you are joining that work that you believe God is doing in the world? How can we support you in this? And it's helpful for them to put their thoughts down, but I think it's especially helpful to almost give license to spend time on this, right? We're an investor that doesn't just tolerate their core motivation, but truly celebrates it. And there's something very life-giving about feeling seen and known in having something like this, but it's a core to how we work with our founders. Getting that personal and spiritual support there. This is simply the idea that we seek to do life together with our founders, right? We want to pray together with them, encourage them, get to know their spouses and their families, right? We want them to feel seen and known. On the one hand, that makes them more resilient for the journey, but on the other hand, it's just simply the right thing to do as we represent what Christians might say is the easy yoke of Christ, where when you have somebody helping to bear that burden, it can just be the right way to do it in community, pursuing this mission together. We build a like-minded community there. So we've got over 100 faith-driven founders that are in our immediate circles that are on the same journeys, and finding community, right? Just feeling like you are not alone in this. Having a community that understands every element of what you're doing is deeply life-giving as well. We've got advisors and LPs who are like-minded and can support them. And these aren't, just folks who, have good intentions, right? I think about, there's a gentleman who ran global supply chain for a top 3 tech company for 30 years, who's one of our LPs that supports them. Another one who was the chief technology officer for a top 4 cryptocurrency token, right? That also is available and invests, and just part of this community that, again, feeling like there are others that are other parts of this body going in and seeking to have this connective tissue to pursue the mission in the world. We launched something called Faith Driven Entrepreneur. This is a nonprofit that just simply wants to give community and resources and content for founders that are all over the world. It's a standalone nonprofit now. We try to contribute to it, but that's something that the ecosystem has come up with that we can point our founders toward. And lastly, resources for faith and work. These are very acute interventions, you could say, where we try to serve. For instance, we have the Committed Partnership Fund. This is a donor advised fund where we have folks across Sovereign's Capital that donate our own personal capital into it. It becomes a charitable vehicle. And any one of the employees in our venture-backed companies can apply for funding from this. And the idea is, when you're working for a tech company early on, you're not doing it for the cash comp, right? You're playing for the upside of the equity. So if you have a hard diagnosis medically, if you have a car that's broken down, sometimes that can be all the difference between your family thriving or not. And so we have this anonymous process where they can apply for funding, get up to $2,500 to help to alleviate some of the burden of those instances. And our CEOs have said, wow, this is deeply encouraging, because I can go to my team and tell them there's an investor that believes there's a God that loves you, and they want to be an instrument of that love. And so feel free to apply. I hope it helps. No catch, no cost. But please just feel that love flowing to you. So a really neat vehicle that we can have. And then I'll hit on that lunch and learns, right? We've got a handful of unicorn founders who are also faith-driven individuals, right? These are folks that sold their companies for $1 billion or more. And the excellence that they bring, the mentorship they can offer, we try to create some of these resources for our founders. And these kinds of resources would be a nice to have generally, but in companies where faith-driven founders are experiencing the thinnest margin, loneliest years of their lives as they build companies, they tend to be deeply meaningful channels of support. And last slide here in closing, none of this matters if companies are not pursuing excellence. So this is from our theory of change. We say business excellence is crucial to the mission. God entrusts our companies to us as stewards. They serve as signposts to him and his character. Without good operations, solid leadership, adept advisors, for instance, we lack a successful platform to scale redemptive outcomes. Yes, sovereigns, we don't think returns and impact have to be at odds with each other, at least not in many asset classes. I mentioned Grab's a $21 billion company. Valor is poised to redefine the energy sector. I could cite dozens of similar companies, and we believe that returns and progress should come not at the expense of faith-driven values, but really because of them. Right? The mission and culture of these companies can attract and retain the best and the brightest. The commitment of co-founders to deal with conflict in healthy ways can reduce company mortality rates. And many other elements should be reasons that faith-driven companies can succeed. And as sovereigns, that's really what animates us. It's what drives us to do the hard work, working with our founders every single day. And it's an honor to walk alongside them in that journey. And of course, as these companies grow, many of them go public. They become accessible to many more investors worldwide. And we invest in that space too, although the approach, the value prop, and many details are quite different. So I'll pass it over to Steve, who will transition to Matt to tell us more about our approach there.
Jake, thanks for that very much. Those were really wonderful examples. And I find that the word that's ringing in my mind right now is integration, just the integration of the values into the business plans. And just as you described, the mindset and what I'll call the heart set of the folks who you're working with. Really interesting. It's something we think about a lot in terms of integrating faith values. It's all well and good on a Sunday morning or a Saturday or a Friday, but to take it out into the world is really just great to hear about, and obviously can take so many different forms. So let's turn now, and I'll introduce Matt Monson. And Matt's also with Sovereign's Capital, and he heads up the public equity area of the firm's efforts. And so Matt also has a great deal of experience. His bio is here. As you can see, a lot of different work experiences that have now been brought to bear in this area of Sovereign's work that takes some of those great companies and founders who have had a vision that has worked and worked well and is doing well for investors as well. And they become publicly traded companies. So with that, Matt, let me hand it over to you.
Thanks, Steve, and it's so good to be with everyone here today. I'm just thrilled to be able to follow Jake. It's going to be tough too, so if anyone needs a coffee, now would be the time. And so let me connect a couple things. What Jake was talking about is founders of early stage companies who are bringing their faith to bear and shaping the culture of those early stage companies for excellence and for kingdom impact. Most people believe that by the time you get to a public company, you have to check your faith at the door, and the beautiful things inside that culture that made that company so successful must, kind of have to go by the wayside as the company becomes more sterile and generic. And that couldn't be further from true. So, what we do at Sovereign's Capital is we only invest in companies led by faith-driven CEOs who are building absolutely exceptional cultures that enable human flourishing. See, that's what it's all about. If you enable employees to flourish, it's our belief that you can attract and retain some of the best employees in the marketplace. And for companies that have some of the best employees, they can generate really strong business results. So before I go any further, let me just tee up an example of a hypothetical household so that we can all get on the same page around how important investing really is. So let's say a household has $100,000 of top line income, but let's say they're giving to philanthropy for $10,000 of their annual income. Well, their investment account, including retirement accounts, might be $1 million. So the size of their investment accounts at $1 million is 100x the size of their annual philanthropic giving. And so most people don't want their investment accounts working against their annual philanthropic giving. But if you invest with, let's call it ETFs and mutual funds run by some really large organizations, they may actually take your shares that you own in companies in those ETFs and mutual funds and push companies to do things that are in conflict with your faith values. And so it's very important to recognize which fund managers you're investing with and what their values are, because they're using your shares to push their values in the marketplace. And in the case where you have 100x the size in your investment account as you do in your annual giving, and that those are being used in direct conflict to your annual giving, you don't want to negate your annual giving. So it's just a concept for all of us to be aware of. So what we are really focused on, and setting the stage around what faith-driven and faith-consistent investing have looked like over the last 300 years, is faith-consistent investing inside public equities over the last 300 years has consisted of negative screening. Negative screening means we want to avoid the companies that come into the most conflict with our values and own the rest. What we pioneered at Sovereigns, and maybe pioneered is too strong of a word, but what we're doing is we only invest in the companies that best demonstrate our values. And so it's really flipping the equation upside down. Rather than avoiding the bottom 5%, you're going after the top 2%. And so I illustrate this not just as a frame for what we do, but it's a frame for what you can do. What you can do in private equities, what you can do in venture capital, what you can do in real estate, what you can do in public equity. You can make your capital reflect your values by aligning with the companies that best demonstrate your values. So there are things that we look for specifically with publicly traded companies. I'll hit a few of them really quick and give you a couple examples of what some of those companies look like. But we only invest in companies, as I mentioned, run by faith-driven CEOs. We only invest in companies that have HR benefits that are significantly above that of the rate of their peers, because it gives you a chance to love on and care for every single employee in a tangible way. We invest in companies that run chaplaincy programs. Chaplaincy programs inside the context of public companies can also be called care teams. They're really counselors that are walking the floor of every location, talking to people and understanding what's going on in their lives and helping them overcome the issues of, it could be depression, anxiety, addiction, death in a family. And so we find that there's an incredible benefit to employees by having these counselors available. We invest in companies that run Bible studies, prayer groups, that run other faith background groups, because ultimately, when an employee walks through the front door of a company, they might be brand new to that city, they might be brand new to that company, they don't know anyone there. And what they really want is to meet and make a friend at work. And people that have best friends at work don't quit where they work. We look for companies that have things like servant leadership and the golden rule at the center of everything they do. I could give you countless numbers of large cap companies, $40 billion in market cap, that say our secret sauce is culture. And it's because of servant leadership. When we put servant leadership at the core of everything, we can incentivize employees and bonus them based on demonstrating actions of servant leadership. And when you do that, you end up with performance as a byproduct. So let me give you a couple examples, just ever so briefly, around large cap companies publicly traded on either the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ that really exemplify these things and put some color to it. So one of the companies that we've invested in is called Coca-Cola Consolidated. Its ticker is Coke. They are not the Coca-Cola company in Atlanta. Instead, they're a bottler based in Charlotte, North Carolina. And what this company has said, for instance, is that the purpose statement of the company is to honor God in all we do. And then they go on to talk about generating profit and being excellent. What the company also does is they have chaplains in 100 plants. The company has a daily devotional. The company is giving philanthropically out of company profits and is involving employees in how they do it. They're volunteering together as a company. What this company, Coca-Cola Consolidated, sees is employee retention rates that are multiples greater than that of their industry. And that has led to seeing financial performance that is multiples greater of that of their industry. And they do it all while being one of the most faith-aligned publicly traded companies in the world. Another company to use as an example for a bit of a before and after picture is we invest in LCI, which is an RV components manufacturer. What they had was 130% employee turnover a decade ago. That's a terrible number. That means you're losing 130% of your employees every year. And so they recognized something was wrong. And if you fast forward, what they did was they went on a listening tour. They fixed problems that were causing employee challenges at work. But then they decided to go on offense. And when they went on offense, what they did was they said, why not hire pastors and sports coaches to sit with our employees and to ask them what their dreams are and help them achieve them? When you do things like that, you're able to fix employee turnover from being 130% a year to 25% a year. They run baptisms in the parking lots. They've got chaplaincy on board. They have employee benevolence funds, and they run one of the best cultures in their industry. Financial performance, no doubt, has followed. And so giving you a couple examples of companies that really embody what it looks like to love your neighbor and what it looks like to encourage human flourishing for employees is really what we're all about. And so moving on to the next slide here, what we do is we think about aligning capital with companies that best demonstrate our values, but then not stopping there, helping those CEOs to come together and meet one another so that when they meet one another, they can really take it to the next level and adopt each other's best practices. So we like to say that rather than just aligning with the best, we're helping the best of the best also do more. And that's really what our investors can be proud of at the end of the year, that their capital wasn't just invested in the market, but actually changing outcomes. And it's measured in the hundreds of thousands of employees who get touched by new programs that start at companies. So I couldn't talk about impact anymore without just touching on quickly back to Jake's comment and Steve's comment that if we go to the next slide, we don't ever feel like we have to give up performance to be able to invest in companies with these types of impact stories. I hope I illustrated that a little bit around when you do human flourishing right inside a company, it leads to high rates of employee retention, and high rates of employee retention should lead to strong growth in financial metrics. And so when we look at some of our funds, we see that we get to own a basket of publicly traded companies at half the multiple, for instance, the price to earnings multiple of the Magnificent Seven and a fraction of the multiple of the S&P 500, but our companies are generating higher levels of earnings growth from consensus analysts. And so that combination leads us to believe that the funds should perform well in the future. And so we don't believe that there needs to be a trade-off between impact and returns. We believe that if you're looking for the right kind of impact, that type of impact actually drives returns. So Jake touched on AI a moment ago. If we go to the next slide, we can't talk about public equities without talking about AI today. So coming into the holidays, let me give you just a few data points that everyone can be chatting about when they're around the dinner table. Is that today in the S&P 500, about 50% of the weight in the S&P 500 is tied to the AI theme. Now you ask yourself, well, 50% of the weight, does that mean 250 companies out of 500? No, it doesn't. And it's because in a market cap weighted index like the S&P 500, right now, 10 companies make up 41% of the weight of the index. So it's easy to see how you can get to 50% of the weight of the index really being tied to that AI theme. Now, surprisingly, with that AI theme, what you see is that there's people who, not people, but companies that sell AI equipment, such as chips or networking equipment, servers, into the system. And then there's buyers of that equipment. Buyers would be, call it a Meta, who's buying chips. Now, we own a few companies that are selling equipment into the trade. We don't own any of the companies that are buying. Now, most of the weight in the S&P 500 is really made up from the Mag 7, and companies like Meta, who are big buyers of AI equipment, have yet to really come up with a big ROI that offsets all of the CapEx that they've spent. And so here's the interesting statistic is that CapEx projections have gone up by 64% over the last year. These big four companies I've listed here on the left, Amazon, Google, Meta, Microsoft, are now spending $500 billion a year on the likes of things like NVIDIA chips and other networking equipment. But their revenue has only been estimated to go up by 4% as a result over last year. So this is why you've seen some of the disruption in the markets over the last month is that you've now seen CapEx projections skyrocket while revenue projections aren't going up at all. And when you have a situation like this, you really need to find a way to offset and generate brand new profit from AI. Otherwise, you've got mounting depreciation with no way to offset it. So those are just some fun facts for you going into the holidays. And thank you for hearing what Sovereign's Capital is up to and, some of our takes on faith-driven investing and how you can really turn faith-driven investing into seeking the positive rather than just avoiding the negative. So let me turn it back over to Steve and we'll jump back into the rest of the program.
Matt, thank you so much for that. Some great insights there and really sort of resonates here at Faith Invest because, in fact, particularly regarding performance, and that performance need not be a trade-off for faith-consistent investing. We did a paper earlier this year, penned by our executive chair, by Dave Zellner, all about challenging the myth of faith-consistent investing underperformance. So your slide did a great job of affirming that view, and we feel it's one that needs to be heard, particularly by perhaps investment committee members, other board members within faith organizations that are looking to understand better that relationship, that compatibility between performance and faith-driven investing, faith-consistent investing. So we have time for some questions here, and we have some that have come in. So let me just ask, and maybe Jake, I'll come back to you on this one about energy because you had that great slide on startup companies, and you mentioned Valar, the atomic energy company. We know that a lot of folks have strong feelings about fossil fuel exclusion and divestment. Would you like to touch on that issue, the issue of energy within these portfolios or within the venture cap area?
Yeah. So there are a lot of folks who will look to screen out. I mean, their goal really looking at emissions and carbon and climate change. They'll look to screen out a lot of fossil fuels with the idea that the longer term view and impacting human flourishing is a negative one. And then there are some that are very happy to accept those risks because they care more about other things. So I might even answer that by returning to the first principles that, as I've unpacked a little bit, Christians should be pursuing all of our individual and collective callings, including investing behind human flourishing. And different investors will feel called to different elements of that flourishing. And some may feel special conviction around creation care. And many of them can and should screen out oil and gas if that's where they prayerfully feel called to. Others may have a heart for addressing poverty, and they deeply believe that cheap, abundant energy is a major input to addressing that poverty. And they're going to prioritize energy development over screening out emissions. And so on the one hand, as you mentioned, Valerie, I'm encouraged that in addition to focusing on kind of the latest versions of a lot of these important long-time debates, we can also pursue innovation, right, to overcome the constraints that lead to debates themselves, like Valor, that they're trying to create abundant energy and carbon neutrality going hand in hand. But bottom line, to answer your question for Sovereign's Capital, on the venture capital side, for instance, we've never invested in oil and gas in the roughly 100 investments over the years. But if a founder had a rigorous and thoughtful view for how a company in that space could contribute to flourishing, we wouldn't screen it out just because of the sector. Put another way, you could say we believe there's freedom and diversity in how we choose to love God and love our neighbor. And with freedom and diversity must come grace for others who have conviction to address different parts of the needs that they see in the world. So that's how we think about it, first principles.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jake. And Matt, if I could turn back to you, and you touched a little bit on this already in your performance discussion, but we had a question on a Christian attitude towards risk and what that should look like and how this would shape our investing approach.
Yeah.
How's that for a little small topic to hit?
No big deal. No big deal. I mean, I feel like there's undercurrents here. We could get into even a parable of the talents kind of story. But, as we think through risk, we want to get exposure to a market level of risk. And when we do that, we want to do it in a diversified way. We don't want to miss out on how we can make our capital productive. And we don't want to miss out on what that return potential could look like. And so when we're looking through risk, though, we're not looking to take outsized amounts of risk either. And so, going back to AI for just one quick second, I think that you can illustrate this well. If 50% of the weight in the S&P 500 is tied to AI, JP Morgan says 75% of the return of the S&P 500 since ChatGPT was launched in November 22 has been tied to AI. 80% of the return in the S&P 500 in 2025 year to date has been tied to AI. There's a lot of concentration there around one theme. And so we're always weighing off how can we capture a market level of risk without over-indexing into only one theme when we have a diverse economy that we can be investing in. And so sometimes that creates temporary trade-offs as well. And so we've seen, for instance, there's been periods of time where our funds have doubled the rate of the return of the market. We've also seen periods of time where our funds have underperformed the market. And if your fund underperforms the market during a period of time that AI is the only thing that's moving the market, is that an appropriate level of risk that you took, given that you didn't over-index to only one theme? I believe so. And so there's a lot of nuance, and that's a wonderful question.
Hey, Steve, if I could jump in too, I'm noticing our attendees, you have a lot of quantitative investors and a lot of folks in universities and the rest, and no better answer for the actual investment nuts and bolts. I might even offer a perspective on that same cube turning around. And bottom line, I think we'd say, as a community of Christians, as what Christians would call the body of Christ, we believe we're really called to risk. We're responsible to risk, right? If the core thread in the Christian story is to join God's work in making all things new, what does being made new look like? Well, we think it's three things, right? Individuals coming to understand who God is, understand ourselves in light of that truth, and becoming something new in the process. Number two, we believe it's communities experiencing human flourishing. And three, more generally, it's really reflecting the eternal attributes of God into the world, things like truth, goodness, beauty, justice. When these things happen, we believe we're reflecting the way the world should be, and Christians believe one day will be. So point is, if we're participating in making all things new, we're involved in change, and change always involves risk. So I think Christians recognize that there are different parts of the community, or we believe there's different parts of the community with different callings, giftings, resources. So I'd encourage all of us, we try to encourage ourselves as individuals and in different groups, right? To really ask ourselves, what are the changes in the world that we've been given a heart for? How does that match our roles and our resources, right? Is one a fiduciary for others? Do they have a longer short-term time horizon? What are the return expectations, right? The answers to these kinds of questions will inform a level of appropriate risk. But we do think we should always lean in toward taking risk, recognizing that capital has influence and a faithful posture is always one of stewarding influence.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jake. That's terrific. And I think that is that's an issue of top of mind for investors of all faiths and in all manners. And that's a great way to frame it in this context. We just have time for, I'd say we're a little over, but one more question. And I wanted to give you a chance to touch on faith-driven investor, as it is such a near and dear to your hearts at Sovereigns, and there's some connectivity there. Either Jake or Matt, would you like to speak to faith-driven investor and how that ties in?
Sure, Jake, why don't you
Yeah,
take it?
sure. I'll start and you fill in my gaps. Well, we should really turn over to Dana, who asked that question because she's a real expert in the room. But so a number of years ago, we launched. I touched on faith-driven entrepreneur to support the entrepreneurial ecosystem in this space, and there became a very quick need out of that for investors who wanted to be involved in those types of companies that were in that community. So that organization launched Faith-Driven Investor as well, and is a really neat community of faith-driven, Christ-following investors that come together and saying, whether I'm a high net worth individual, a fund manager, family office, institutional investor, how does my faith bring to bear or bear on my decisions in the investing space? And so it's faithdriveninvestor.org. It's a great crew that's bringing that together. There's a lot of content. There's an annual conference with just some incredible speakers, David Platt and Tim Tebow, and those running the biggest hedge funds in the world, and a lot of great content there. And in a very life-giving turn, there's a group called the Foundations course, where investors can join on with 8 to 12 other investors. I believe it's 6 weeks, just 1 hour a week, no prep, no cost. You get on, you hear from a thought leader for about 20 minutes and have a conversation in community. Really, again, getting back to this, whether it's in our Christian faith or the many of the faiths represented here, right? None of us believe this should be done alone, right? We need to be doing, there's a broader mission, and to be able to do this with others. We were made for community, no matter where that belief comes from. Like, we were made for community. We all know that in our bones. And so this is a way to help those faith-driven investors to do that.
Thanks, Jake. And yeah, and well, echo that, because in our work, one of the things that we've noted is the challenges faced by particularly small faith communities, small organizations, whether it's an individual parish, individual ministry, providing those networks can be so empowering, so motivational, and provide that basis for getting the support needed to continue that faith consistent investing journey. So that great comment on that. Thank you. Well, I think we've just gone actually a little bit over time here, and I'm glad we were able to get some of those questions in. If you have additional questions, you can drop them into the chat, and we'll do our best to follow up and answer those. We do have a slide here, just some of the resources that are available through FaithInvest. Just jump on the website, have a look at our research reports and case studies that we've done. We do provide, as I mentioned earlier, investment policy assessments. We do those at no charge. If your faith organization would like to have the investment policy for the group reviewed for faith consistency, we are very happy to do that. Please give us a jingle, and we'll help you with that. We have courses available as well that you can look at on our website. And then finally, in closing, I'll mention that our forums will kick off in 2026 with a focus on real assets, real estate, land, infrastructure, and how faith organizations can leverage those assets for faith consistent investing. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us. And it's been a pleasure having you, Jake and Matt, with us. Much appreciated. We wish everyone a great rest of your day or evening, depending on your geographic location. And we'll look forward to seeing you again at another forum soon. With that, thank you, and a good night to everyone.